Did you know that the word negociant is a French term that can make you sound smarter at dinner parties? Although, in order to complete that effect, it really helps to know what a negociant is. So, for the etymology geeks, negociant is French in origin, although it does seem that the French seem to borrow parts of Italian in order to build their French word. Now, the first evidence for this term is to be found in the writings of William Seeger in the year 1602. In an alternate universe, the year 1602 was in fact the year that the Marvel Avengers team first formed. And you can watch this controversial adventure in episode 8 of season 2 of the Marvel comic series What If? You're welcome. Historically, negociants have had a reputation for being slightly predatory because they would wait for farmers to do their farming and grow their vines and harvest the grapes and then make the wine, and then they'd swoop in and pressure the farmers to sell their wine for low prices, telling them that no one wanted it. And then they'd go elsewhere and sell that same wine for a high price. At their craziest, negociants in Burgundy would be blending in rich Algerian wines into local Pinot Noirs, but still charging the highest prices by convincing people that these were the purest of Burgundies. Their Italian counterparts were no better, for they would take the rather bony Sangioveses of Tuscany and then blend in some super jammy Primitivos from further south, all the while extolling the glories of pure Tuscan terroir. But for all the crazies and the predatories, it just takes a few examples of some good-hearted, hard-working negociants to really see how the system can work, how it can enable farmers or vignerons to focus on their viticulture and on their winemaking, and then have merchants take that wine and with their experience find new markets and create more demand for the work that the vignerons are doing. So it's really win-win in its best case. We mentioned that originally the term came from Burgundy, and to this day, the world's most famous vignerons are still based in Burgundy. Guys like Bouchard et Fils, or Jadot, or even Maison Joseph Drouhin. Now, these sorts of operations are usually masters of the larger appellation, and they understand exactly how all the little vineyards and sub-appellations fit together and what each producer can bring to the mix. And so they're able to buy in parcels of wine from all over the place and blend them together in a way that creates synergy, so that you have a wine that is not only expressed with integrity to be 100% Burgundian, but is also an expression of the terroir and delicious to drink. Now, we can talk about the different types of negociant at a later date, because right now we have to get down to the hand drink solo wine of the day. The Wade Bales Constantia White Blend, which was brought to life by Wade Bales of the Wade Bales Wine Club. Probably one of the coolest things about Wade Bales and the Wade Bales Wine Club is that it gives you the opportunity to use the word eponymous. As the founder of the Wade Bales Wine Club, Wade has been sourcing and curating and then distributing South African wine cases across South Africa for almost 25 years. But the little nook that he calls home is the standalone South African ward of Constantia. And so it's from here that he chose to source the fruit which would eventually produce his first eponymously labeled bottle of wine. Every wine territory in the world will have merchants or traders who may buy in bulk wine and then bottle it under various labels and take it to market. But that is not to say that they necessarily have a culture of negociant. In South Africa, for example, much of that work is done by the sometimes helpful and sometimes unhelpful co-op system. But I would not say that South Africa has a culture of negociant. And that is where a man like Wade Bales sought to make the world a better place. Wade chose to play the role of what I would call chairman negociant, where he gathered all the incredibly talented winemakers from the wine ward of Constantia and sat them down to explain his vision of a single wine that used parcels from across the valley that would in fact express Constantia as a coherent whole. And so it is that now there is a panel of these winemakers that gathers each year, chaired by Wade Bales in his chairman negociant role, where each winemaker will bring a parcel that they've selected and set aside for this project, and then will present it to their peers, who will discuss not only the merits of each parcel that each of their peers brings, but also what qualities will accurately reflect Constantia within that vintage. Then at the end of that collaborative phase, one winemaker has chosen to blend and bottle that particular vintage. Now, what's really cool to see is not only how a region can unite in order to produce something that represents them as well as this wine does, but it's even cooler to see that other regions are beginning to follow this model and producing really interesting bottlings that are defined first and foremost by their appellation or their ward, rather than, say, their cultivar, which is the norm for South Africa. Given that almost 50% of the vines in Constantia are Sauvignon Blanc, it's no surprise that this particular white blend is Sauvignon Blanc fronted. Now, the 2020 vintage, which won a Platter 5-star award, is 80% Sauvignon and 20% Semillon, but that ratio will shift from year to year. And when we finally get into the glass and give this guy a sniff, well, we are very quickly made aware of just how much class there is in the glass. The complexity is almost overwhelming. There's these beautiful triple layer, 3 categories of aromas that work together. So you have your floral elderflower, then you've got slightly more serious herbal elements, which is perhaps lemongrass, lime leaf. In the vegetal camp, there's slightly savory salted asparagus along with salted bread dough. Now, all of the elements that I mentioned there are kind of savory in nature, perhaps with the exception of the elderflower. And that's why it's so great that there's a 3rd category of aromas that offsets that all. And that is the ever so slightly sweeter oak-inspired secondary aromas that really bring a lovely sort of butterscotch or butter toffee note in amidst all the moodier elements. And when we finally get to take a sip, well, that theme of contrasting sweet and savory and sour really seems to carry through, because you have a lovely juicy tart lime element along with some bitter grapefruit elements, but those lean up against the slightly sweeter salted caramel and lemon bonbon notes. There's even a hint of blackcurrant, which is really very rare, but in my experience, some of South Africa's best Sauvignons will have that slightly deeper, more mysterious, almost black fruit element underneath the herbal notes of things like lemongrass or lime leaf or asparagus. And the last element to notice is not flavor notes really, but more about structure, because the wine has such incredible concentration. It's got this super elegant high acidity, but the nature of the fruit is that it's so dense down the core and it lingers for so long that you just can't help be impressed as that sort of lime cordial element finishes off, complicated by oak spice. It's a fantastic wine. So that's all we have time for today, but if you enjoyed the video, then support us on Patreon so that we can make more of these videos. And then subscribe to the Handling Solo YouTube channel, where we publish at least 6 videos each month talking about things like wine science, wine history, unusual cultivars, and some of the rising winemaking stars or negociants coming out of the dynamic South African wine bins.